The sun was unforgiving that afternoon, burning over the sprawling chaos of Abuja's Garki market. Hawkers called out prices, kiki horns blared, and the smell of roasted corn mixed with exhaust fumes. Amid the noise, Chinedu Okafor sat quietly on a wooden bench outside a cybercafe. His laptop open, eyes weary but determined. His white shirt, once crisp, was now stained with sweat. He scrolled through job postings like a man searching for air underwater. Bachelor's degree in biochemistry, 2 years experience. Relocation not provided, he murmured, sighing. For 3 years since graduation, life had been a seesaw between hope and disappointment. His mother in Enugu still believed her son was making it in Abuja, but the truth was, Chinedu was barely surviving on occasional freelance tech jobs and tutoring kids for 2,000 Nigerian nairas a lesson. His phone buzzed. A voice message from his mother came through, sweet and tired. "Nedu, my son, I just wanted to check on you. I prayed for you this morning. Don't give up, okay? God's time is the best time." He smiled faintly. God's time. But when exactly? He closed his laptop and stared at the sky, a messy mix of gray clouds and harmattan haze. Around him, Abuja moved with the arrogance of a city that didn't care whether you sank or swam. He wanted more than survival. He wanted meaning. But that dream, like everything else, was expensive. That night, Chinedu returned to his one-room apartment in Kubwa. The fan barely worked, the ceiling had stains from last year's leak, and mosquitoes hummed like unpaid creditors. He took off his shirt, sat by the window, and whispered to himself, "There has to be more than this." He thought of his late father, a schoolteacher who died without pension. He thought of his siblings, still in school. He thought of his mother, still calling him her hope. And deep down, a tiny ember of determination refused to die. 2 weeks later, it came like a whisper, one of those random messages that change everything. Chinedu had gone to a nearby cafe to check his email when he saw a new listing on an international job board. Live-in caregiver wanted. Toronto, Canada. Good pay, private accommodation, work permit, sponsorship available. Experience with elderly care preferred. He almost scrolled past it. Caregiver. I'm not even in the medical field, he thought. But the pay, $4,000 per month, made him stop. He clicked. The posting was from a small Canadian agency that specialized in home assistance for seniors. The client's name was Mrs. Margaret Thompson, a 71-year-old widow living in Toronto. She needed someone patient, understanding, and willing to assist with light meals, companionship, and errands. Chinedu leaned back in his chair. Companionship. Can talk. Meals. Can cook. Still the doubts crept in. He'd never traveled outside Nigeria, didn't know the first thing about Canadian winters, and wasn't sure he could handle being someone's caretaker. But something in his chest whispered, "What if this is the door you've been praying for?" That evening, he filled the form carefully, attaching his certificates, a brief CV, and a heartfelt messages. "Dear Madam, I may not have much experience, but I have compassion, strength, and patience. I understand loneliness, and I respect elders. Please consider me." He sent it and prayed like he hadn't prayed in years. Days passed. Nothing. Then one evening, while washing his single plate after dinner, his phone rang. Unknown international number. "Hello, is this Mr. Chinedu Okafor?" "Yes, speaking. Good evening. This is Lisa from Maple Care Agency in Toronto. Your application caught our attention." Chinedu's heart raced. He stood still, gripping his phone. "We'd like to schedule an interview tomorrow at 5 p.m. Nigerian time via Zoom. Are you available?" "Yes, I'll be available. Thank you so much." The call ended. He stood there frozen, soap dripping from his hands, staring into nothing. That night he couldn't sleep. He practiced how to speak clearly, how to smile naturally, how to sound confident but humble. He even borrowed a shirt from his neighbor for the interview. When the video call finally happened, he found himself talking to 2 women. One was from the agency, and the other was the elderly woman herself, Mrs. Margaret Thompson. She had silver hair tied in a bun, soft blue eyes, and the kind of presence that felt both fragile and powerful. "So, Mr. Okafor," she said with a faint smile, "why do you want to leave Nigeria to take care of a stranger in Canada?" He hesitated, then spoke honestly. "Because I believe we are all connected by kindness, ma'am. I know what it means to feel alone, and if my presence can make someone's day brighter, then maybe I'm meant to do this." Margaret smiled gently. "That's a beautiful answer." The interview lasted 20 minutes. By the time it ended, the agency rep said, "We'll be in touch." 3 days later, Chinedu received the email that would rewrite his life. "Congratulations! You have been selected as the caregiver for Mrs. Margaret Thompson. Your visa sponsorship process begins immediately." He read it over and over, tears of disbelief rolling down his cheeks. He dropped to his knees, whispering, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you." The next month was a whirlwind of passport renewals, medical checks, and paperwork. He called his mother to tell her the news. She screamed and cried through the phone. "Canada? My son, Canada. God has remembered us." On the day he flew out, Chinedu stood at the Nnamdi Azikiwe airport, clutching his small suitcase and a new coat he bought from Market. As the plane took off, he watched Abuja's lights shrink beneath the clouds, his mind filled with gratitude and fear. He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to collide with destiny in the most unexpected way. The city of Toronto was quiet that morning, draped in the soft whiteness of early snow. Inside a large Victorian house on Maplewood Drive, Margaret Thompson sat by the window, staring at nothing in particular. The clock ticked softly on the wall, its rhythm the only sound that dared to disturb the silence. On the mantelpiece stood a framed photo, a tall man in a Canadian Army uniform, his arm wrapped proudly around a younger Margaret. The inscription read, "General Robert Thompson, 1949 to 2021. He had died 2 weeks after their 12th wedding anniversary, an aneurysm that came without warning. One moment they were dancing in the living room to Nat King Cole's Unforgettable, and the next, she was holding his hand as the paramedics wheeled him away. That was 3 years ago, but for Margaret, time had stopped the day he left. The house felt too large now. Every room echoed with memories. The piano gathered dust. His favorite armchair still faced the fireplace. She still made tea for 2, then poured the second cup down the sink out of habit. Her doctor had warned her about isolation. "Margaret, you need help. Companionship. Someone to talk to." She had resisted the idea for months. But loneliness is a persuasive disease. It creeps into your bones until silence becomes unbearable. When the agency called about a young caregiver from Nigeria, she hesitated. "Nigeria?" she had asked. "That's quite far." "Yes, but he's very compassionate," the agent said. "And available full-time." Something in her heart said yes. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe hope. Maybe the simple human need not to eat breakfast alone anymore. Now, as she waited for him to arrive, she looked at the empty driveway blanketed with snow. "A stranger from another world," she whispered to herself. "Let's see what kindness looks like in his language." And somewhere, high above the Atlantic, on a flight from Abuja to Toronto, Chinedu sat by the window, watching clouds drift past. His heart thumped with a mixture of fear, faith, and something he couldn't yet name. The morning light filtered through sheer curtains, casting golden streaks across the living room. Margaret Thompson sat in her late husband's favorite chair, the one by the fireplace that still smelled faintly of his cologne. A steaming cup of tea rested untouched beside her. The old house was too quiet, so quiet she could almost hear the echo of his laughter. She reached for the photo album on her lap, fingers trembling as she turned the pages. There he was, General Robert Thompson, tall, broad-shouldered, with a kind of posture that demanded respect even when he said nothing. They had met late in life. She was 59, a retired art teacher, divorced for years, and perfectly content with her solitude. He was 61, widowed, a career soldier with medals and scars to match. They met at a military charity ball she had attended reluctantly. He had walked up to her in his crisp uniform and said, "You look like someone who appreciates silence." She smiled at the memory. That line had been terrible, but something about his awkward honesty had charmed her. Their courtship was quiet but sure. Walks by the lake, late-night conversations about philosophy and faith, shared laughter over tea. On their wedding day he had whispered in her ear, "You've taught me that peace isn't the absence of war, it's the presence of love." For 12 beautiful years, they had built a world of quiet companionship. He retired from active duty, grew a garden in the backyard, and spent evenings listening to her play the piano. Life was gentle, predictable, and safe. Until that night. 2 weeks after their 12th anniversary, they were dancing in the living room, Nat King Cole playing softly on the record player. Margaret still remembered the glow of the fireplace, the faint scent of Robert's aftershave, and how he smiled at her mid-spin. Then he froze. His smile faltered. "Margie," he gasped, clutching his chest. The cup of tea she was holding slipped and shattered. Panic. Creams. Sarins. The smell of antiseptic in the hospital hallway. It was over before dawn. He was gone just like that. For months, she couldn't step into that living room without collapsing. The piano stayed closed. The curtains stayed drawn. And though 3 years had passed, every tick of the clock still felt like a countdown to emptiness. As she closed the album, a tear slid down her cheek. She whispered softly, "Robert, I'm trying to live again." And somewhere, as if fate had been listening, the young man destined to walk into her lonely world was already packing his bags thousands of miles away. The evening breeze carried a familiar scent of dust and diesel across the neighborhood as Chinedu folded the last of his shirts into a small, worn suitcase. His visa was approved, his ticket printed, and in 3 days he would be leaving Nigeria for the first time. His mother called every hour, sometimes to pray, sometimes to cry. His younger sister, Amara, hovered beside him, teasing him while helping him pack. "So, Oga Canada, you won't miss us, ABI? I will miss you well, he laughed. But don't worry, I'll be calling every day. Just don't go there and forget home like those Joppa people," she said, zipping up his bag dramatically. He smiled, but inside he felt a tug. Abuja wasn't perfect. It had drained him, tested him, but it was still home. 2 days before departure, he visited his pastor for prayers. The old man laid his hand on Chinedu's shoulder and said, "My son, don't only go to make money. Go to make meaning. Sometimes, God hides purpose inside strange assignments." The words settled deep in his heart. At the airport on the morning of his flight, everything felt surreal. His mother stood in the departure hall, clutching her rosary, eyes red from tears. "My son," she said softly, "remember who you are. Be good, be humble, and keep your heart open. Even in a strange land, God can still plant love." He hugged her tightly, inhaling the scent of home one last time. When the announcement for boarding came, he waved and whispered, "I'll make you proud, Mama." As the plane lifted off, he looked down at Abuja's fading lights and felt both fear and freedom at once. Hours later, somewhere over the Atlantic, he pressed his forehead against the window. The sky was dark, but beneath it, he felt the stirrings of destiny. The cold hit him first. When Chinedu stepped out of Pearson International Airport, Toronto greeted him with a slap of icy wind that felt like 1,000 tiny needles against his skin. He had never seen snow before. It fell softly, gracefully, like white feathers from heaven. He pulled his thin jacket tighter and laughed nervously. "So this is snow. It's fine on TV but wicked in real life." The taxi ride to Maplewood Drive was quiet. He stared out the window at the foreign world. Orderly streets, clean sidewalks, houses decorated with lights. Everything looked too calm, too organized, too distant from the chaos he knew in Abuja. When the taxi stopped in front of Margaret's house, he froze. The Victorian home stood like a piece of history, white brick walls, a porch with wind chimes, and a large oak tree shedding the last of its autumn leaves. He rang the bell. Moments later, the door creaked open, and there she was. Margaret Thompson. Silver hair neatly tied. A warm sweater draped over her shoulders. Her blue eyes looked cautious, curious, and slightly amused. For a second neither spoke. The age gap, the cultural distance, it all hung thick in the air. "Mrs. Thompson," Chinedu said finally, smiling. "Yes. You must be Mr. Okafor," she replied softly. Her accent was crisp, her tone gentle. He nodded, stepping in awkwardly, his suitcase bumping against the doorway. "Please call me Chinedu." "All right, Chinedu. And you can call me Margaret." The warmth of the house hit him immediately, the smell of freshly baked bread and lavender candles. She led him through the hallway, where portraits of her husband in uniform lined the walls. "This will be your room," she said, showing him a cozy guest room overlooking the garden. "You can settle in and rest. Dinner is at 6. "Thank you, ma'am." Margaret," he corrected himself quickly. As he unpacked, he stared out the window at the quiet snow, realizing how far he was from home. No generator noise, no street vendors shouting, no neighbors laughing. Just silence. That evening, over dinner, the conversation started stiffly. She asked about Nigeria. He asked about the weather. But slowly something softened. When she laughed, a small, careful laugh, it startled him. It was the sound of someone remembering joy. "You must miss your family," she said gently. "Yes, I do," he admitted. "But I'm grateful to be here." "And I'm grateful you came," she said quietly, eyes glinting with something he couldn't yet name. After dinner, he helped her clear the table, insisting she rest. As he washed the dishes, he noticed her standing in the doorway, watching him with a faint smile, the kind that spoke of comfort after years of solitude. Later that night, when Chinedu lay on his new bed, staring at the ceiling, he whispered, "Maybe this is where I'm meant to be." Outside, snow continued to fall gently, covering the world in quiet white. Inside, two lonely hearts, one old, one young, had just crossed paths, unaware that love was quietly stirring in the silence between them. Excellent. Here's the continuation of your story. This next section deepens the emotional connection between Chinedu and Margaret, showing the tender evolution from awkward strangers to quiet companions. It remains cinematic, heartfelt, and filled with cultural detail, emotion, and natural dialogue. All fresh, original writing. The first week in Margaret Thompson's house was a quiet storm of awkwardness. Chinedu tried his best to adjust, but everything felt strange. The silence, the routine, even the air. In Abuja, mornings were filled with noise. Radios, neighbors arguing, the cry of street hawkers. Here mornings whispered. Margaret woke up at 6 every day. She liked her tea with exactly 1.5 teaspoons of sugar and read the Toronto Star by the window. Chinedu, eager to impress, would prepare breakfast early. Toast, eggs, sometimes oatmeal. "You don't have to do so much, Chinedu," she said one morning, watching him from the kitchen doorway. "No ma, I like cooking early. Back home, my mother says a good day starts from the kitchen." "That's sweet," she smiled. "But here we start with coffee." He laughed, rubbing his head. "Then maybe I'll learn coffee too." It was these small differences that colored their days. How she folded napkins with precision, how he preferred to eat with his hands when no one was watching. How she liked the house quiet, while he hummed Afrobeats softly while cleaning. One morning he played Flavor's Ada Ada on his phone while vacuuming. Margaret appeared from her study, slightly frowning. "Chinedu, what's that noise?" It's music, ma. Sorry, Margaret. Nigerian love song." "It's lively," she said, pausing. "But maybe turn it down a bit." Yes, ma. Margaret," he corrected quickly. Later that day, she walked past him again and said, "That song Ada Ada, what does it mean?" "It means a woman of value, a good woman," he replied, smiling. "We use it to praise women." "I see," she said softly, walking away, but he noticed the small smile tugging at her lips. Even their conversations were delicate dances. He'd call her ma'am by habit, she'd frown slightly and tell him, "You make me sound like a teacher." He'd apologize, she'd sigh and wave it off. But beneath the politeness, something was growing, curiosity. Margaret found herself observing him quietly. The way he handled things gently, how he prayed before meals, how he talked about his family. One evening, as snow fell thick outside, she asked, "What do you miss most about home?" "The noise," he said without thinking. "It's strange, but back home even silence is loud. Here everything is too calm. It makes me think too much." "Thinking isn't bad," she smiled. "It can be when you remember hunger," he said quietly. She looked at him for a moment, the honesty, the humility, and something in her chest softened. That night, after he'd gone to bed, she found herself smiling for the first time in months. She whispered into the quiet air, "He's different, in a good way." Winter deepened. Snow piled against the windows, and the house seemed to shrink around its two occupants. Chinedu had settled into routine, cleaning, cooking, reading books from the library she'd shown him. But his curiosity about her life grew stronger each day. Margaret, though kind, was wrapped in layers of silence. One afternoon, he found her sitting in the living room, staring at an old record player. The same one that had once played Nat King Cole. "Do you like music?" he asked gently. "Used to," she said. "I haven't played anything since my husband passed." He hesitated. "You must miss him a lot." "Every day," she whispered. Then, almost without realizing it, she began to talk, the words spilling out like a secret long kept. She told him about Robert, her late husband. His career in the military, their travels, their quiet evenings by the fire. She told him how they met, how she never thought she'd fall in love again at 60, how death had left her stranded between memory and life. Chinedu listened silently. No interruption, no pity, just presence. When she finished, she looked at him and said softly, "Strange, you know, to have so much love and nowhere to put it." He nodded, his eyes warm. "Maybe love never really leaves, Margaret. Maybe it just finds new ways to show itself." She blinked rapidly, caught off guard by his words. There was something disarming about his simplicity, the way he spoke truths without trying. That evening, she asked him to join her for tea. Over the next few weeks, the walls between them began to crumble. She told him about her childhood on Prince Edward Island, how she used to paint seascapes, how she once dreamed of opening a small art gallery but never did. He shared stories from Abuja, the chaos of city life, the laughter of his siblings, the taste of suya under streetlights. One day, she surprised him by saying, "I'd like to taste that suya someday." "Ah, Margaret, are you sure? It's peppery, oh." "Then make it mild," she smiled. "Show me your world." That weekend, he recreated it as best as he could. Grilled beef seasoned with homemade spice, served with vegetables. The smell filled the house, chasing away the sterile quiet that had long lived there. She tasted it carefully, and her face lit up. "This is wonderful." "I told you," he laughed. "Nigerian food can cure sadness." "Maybe you're right," she said softly. And just like that, laughter began to return to the old house. Soft, hesitant, but real. Spring crept in quietly, melting the last traces of snow. Margaret's garden, once neglected, began to stir with color again. Tulips, daffodils, little green promises of life. Every morning, Chinedu would help her prune, water, and arrange the flowers. He didn't know much about gardening, but he knew about care, and somehow that was enough. One day, as they worked side by side, she said, "You have gentle hands." "That's because I was trained by a strong woman," he replied. "My mother." She smiled. "She must be proud of you." "I hope so," he said quietly. Their bond had grown naturally, without plan or pressure. They didn't call it friendship. They didn't have to. It simply existed, in shared silences, in knowing glances, in the comfort of company. Sometimes she would tell him stories of her younger days. The music, the dances, the laughter. Sometimes he would teach her new words in Igbo, Kidu, Odime, and she'd repeat them with her soft accent, making him laugh. Chinedu, what does Nkem mean again? It means mine or my own, he said, grinning. Ah, she chuckled. I'd better not say that to you then. Why not? Because people might talk. They both laughed, but behind the laughter, something unspoken hovered. One evening after dinner, Margaret picked up the record player for the first time in years. She placed a vinyl disc and said, "Do you dance, Chinedu?" "A little," he said shyly. "Then dance with me." The first notes of Unforgettable filled the room, the same song that once played the night her husband died. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed one on his shoulder. He was careful, respectful, unsure if he should even hold her waist. But then she smiled and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm not made of glass." They swayed gently, two souls separated by 4 decades, yet bound by something deeper than time. When the song ended, she sat down, eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't think I'd ever dance again." "Then we'll dance again," he said softly. And that night when she went to bed, she cried, not from sadness, but from a strange, healing joy she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know it yet, but Chinedu had quietly become her reason to wake up. And though he couldn't name it either, the way he checked on her before sleeping, the way he smiled when she laughed, it was more than duty now. It was care turning slowly into love. Outside, the tulips in the garden opened under the dawn light, as if the earth itself was blooming with them. The winter morning came with a haunting quietness. Snowflakes fell lazily over Toronto's streets, and the old maple outside Margaret's window swayed under a white crown. Chinedu was in the kitchen, humming a faint Igbo hymn as he stirred oatmeal for breakfast. The aroma of cinnamon filled the air, something he had learned Margaret loved. When he carried the tray to her room, something felt off. She wasn't sitting in her reading chair as usual. Her newspaper lay open on the bed, glasses on the sheets. "Mrs. Thompson," he called softly. No answer. He dropped the tray and rushed to the bathroom door. Inside, Margaret was on the floor, her body trembling slightly, her breath shallow. Panic seized his chest. "Ma'am." "Oh my God, Mrs. Thompson." He lifted her carefully, his mind racing. He called 911, then held her hand until the ambulance came. She had fainted from low blood pressure, a side effect of her new medication. At the hospital, he waited through the night. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung in the air, and each tick of the clock echoed louder than the last. When she finally opened her eyes the next morning, her voice was barely a whisper. "You stayed." "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. "Where else would I go?" Something shifted in her eyes then, a flicker of warmth breaking through years of guarded loneliness. From that day their dynamic changed. Margaret began to trust him in ways she hadn't trusted anyone in decades. She'd ask about his childhood, his favorite foods, the meaning of his name. In return, she told him about the old cabin she once owned with her husband, the piano she no longer played, and how she missed the sound of laughter in her home. They started sharing breakfast together. Chinedu introduced her to jollof rice, and she introduced him to banana bread. Some evenings they'd sit by the fire, she with her tea, he with hot chocolate, watching the snow melt against the glass. One night, as they watched Casablanca, Margaret smiled faintly. "You know, Chinedu," she said, "you remind me of him sometimes. My husband. Not in looks, but in heart." Chinedu looked down, shy but touched. "He must have been a good man." "He was," she said, her eyes glistening. "And so are you." In that silence, unspoken emotions began to bloom. Not romance yet, but something sacred. Spring came quietly to Toronto. The snow retreated, flowers returned, and with them, something new grew between Chinedu and Margaret. Fragile, yet impossible to ignore. Chinedu found himself thinking of her when he wasn't supposed to. He caught himself watching her smile during breakfast, admiring her grace when she tended to her garden, even the way her silver hair framed her face when sunlight poured through the window. He fought the feelings. She was older, much older. She was his employer. But love, as he'd soon learn, didn't care for boundaries written by society. Margaret too felt the change. His laughter had become her favorite sound. His presence filled her lonely spaces. Yet she battled guilt. What would people say? What would they think of a 71-year-old widow finding affection in a man young enough to be her son? One evening, as they listened to jazz by the fireplace, she said softly, "Chinedu, do you ever miss home?" "Every day," he replied. "But being here doesn't feel so lonely anymore." She turned to him, their eyes meeting. The firelight flickered between them like a heartbeat. "You've brought life back into this house," she whispered. "Maybe," he said gently. "You brought life back into me first." It happened almost instinctively, the way their hands brushed, then lingered. The silence between them grew heavy with meaning. When she finally leaned forward and pressed her lips against his, it wasn't scandal. It was surrender. Two souls meeting where pain had once lived. They didn't speak of it the next morning, but something unspoken had shifted forever. Yet love, especially one born against expectations, is rarely without storms. Chinedu began to receive strange looks from neighbors. A mailman once joked, "You're doing more than caregiving, huh?" Others weren't so subtle. The whispers grew, about money, motives, and morality. Margaret tried to ignore it, but it gnawed at her heart. "They don't understand," she said one evening, tears pooling in her eyes. Chinedu took her hands. "Then let them talk," he said firmly. "I didn't come here to take from you. Came to care. That hasn't changed." In that moment she knew it was real. Not charity, not loneliness, love. No love story survives untouched by the world's opinion, and theirs was no exception. When Chinedu called home to tell his mother the truth, silence filled the line. Then came the disbelief. "You want to marry who?" she asked, her voice trembling. "A 70-year-old woman. Chinedu, is something wrong with you?" "It's not about age, Mama," he said. "She's kind. She's given me more peace than I've ever known." "Peace?" his uncle shouted in the background. "She's old enough to be your grandmother. Don't disgrace us." The judgment was worse from his village. People whispered that he was bewitched or chasing wealth. In Canada, Margaret faced her own version of rejection. Her late husband's friends stopped visiting. Her sister called from Vancouver and said, "Maggie, please tell me this is a phase." Even her doctor gave her a look of quiet disapproval when she mentioned Chinedu's name. They became pariahs in polite society, the young Nigerian caregiver and the old widow with too much love in her heart. And yet, through it all, they clung to each other. When the world turned its back, they found solace in small rituals. Morning walks, cooking together, Sunday readings by the fire. One rainy evening, after a particularly harsh article appeared online calling their relationship unethical, Margaret broke down. "I didn't think loving someone could feel like a crime," she sobbed. Chinedu pulled her close. "Let them call it what they want," he said, his voice low but firm. "To me, it's the first thing that ever felt right." They stayed that way for a long time. A young man from Abuja and an aging widow in Toronto. Two hearts beating against the noise of the world. The storms around them raged, but inside their small home, there was still warmth, still laughter, still love. And soon there would be a decision, one that would silence the world or set it ablaze. The Toronto morning was gray and quiet, but inside Margaret's home, everything was about to change. For weeks, whispers had grown into storms, neighbors avoiding them, tabloids publishing headlines like "Nigerian caregiver enchants widow for wealth." Chinedu had stopped reading the news, but Margaret couldn't help it. Every cruel word pierced her heart like cold steel. "I can't live like this," she said one evening, sitting at the dining table, her eyes heavy. "It feels like the world has turned its back." Chinedu stood across from her, silent for a long time. The fire in the hearth crackled softly between them. "Then let's stop hiding," he said finally. "Let's live for us, not for them." Her eyes lifted, searching his face for hesitation. There was none. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying I love you," he said simply. "And I'm done pretending it's something else. If the world can't understand, that's their burden, not ours." For the first time in months, Margaret smiled, a trembling, tearful smile that reached her soul. The next day they made their decision public. She wrote a heartfelt letter to a local Toronto paper. "I am 71. He is 32. He was hired to care for me, but instead he helped me remember what it means to live. This isn't a scandal. It's a story of healing for both of us." The letter went viral. Some comments were harsh, others kind. But for every cruel word, a stranger somewhere wrote, "Love is love. Let them be." Meanwhile, Chinedu's family back in Abuja slowly began to soften. His younger sister Amara called one night and said, "If she makes you happy, then that's all that matters." His mother didn't speak, but she didn't hang up either. That silence felt like progress. Margaret's world shifted too. A few of her old friends reached out, cautiously at first. One even sent flowers with a note. "You've always been brave, Maggie. Don't stop now." It was enough. Together, they began walking through town hand in hand, no longer avoiding the glances or whispers. They cooked dinner for two, played jazz on Sunday afternoons, and took long drives along Lake Ontario. The world hadn't quieted, it never would. But they had learned to live louder than its noise. One night, under a sky freckled with stars, Chinedu turned to her. "I know this may sound strange," he said softly, "but I want to make this forever. Not in secret. Not in shame. Just us." Margaret stared at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "At my age, I didn't think forever was still possible," she whispered. He smiled gently. "Forever just means as long as we're still breathing." And in that quiet moment, two souls, scarred by time and distance, chose each other over everything else. The ceremony was small, intimate, almost secret, held in the backyard of Margaret's Toronto home. The air smelled of lavender and rain-soaked roses. Only a handful of people were there. A pastor, Amara, who had flown in from Nigeria, two of Margaret's old friends, and a neighbor who had become their quiet supporter. Margaret wore a pale blue gown, simple, elegant, her silver hair brushed neatly behind her ears. Chinedu stood before her in a dark gray suit, his heart pounding like a drum. When the music began, a soft instrumental of "What a Wonderful World," the guests rose and Margaret walked slowly toward him, her eyes never leaving his. As she reached him, she whispered, "You know they'll talk forever, don't you?" He smiled. "Then let them talk about love." The pastor's voice carried softly through the garden. "Love knows no color, no age, no boundary. Only courage." When they exchanged vows, tears flowed freely. Not just theirs but from everyone present. "I, Margaret, take you, Chinedu, to walk beside me, not ahead or behind. To share my days, my laughter, my silence, and my storms. And I, Chinedu, take you, Margaret, not because of what you have, but because of who you are. My peace in a world that rarely understands peace." When the pastor said, "You may kiss," there was no hesitation. Their kiss was gentle, honest, and full of all the emotions that had carried them here. Defiance, tenderness, healing, and grace. As they stepped back, Amara wiped her eyes. "Our brother did the unthinkable," she whispered. "He followed his heart." The reception was simple. Jollof rice and roasted chicken mixed with Canadian pastries and tea. Music played softly. Margaret's garden lights shimmered under the night sky. Later, as the last guests left, Margaret and Chinedu sat together by the fire pit, holding hands. "Do you regret anything?" she asked. "Not a single thing," he said. "Every path led me here." "And me," she whispered. "I thought my story ended when Richard died. But maybe love doesn't end. It just changes its form." He squeezed her hand. "Then this is just another chapter." They laughed softly, the kind of laughter that comes only from peace. Above them, the stars shone brighter, as if the universe itself had chosen to bear witness. Years later, when people spoke of Margaret and Chinedu, they spoke softly, not with mockery anymore, but with wonder. Their story had made its way into hearts around the world. Articles had shifted in tone, now calling them the couple who redefined love beyond time. Margaret lived to see 82. Chinedu was by her side every single day, reading her poetry, cooking her favorite meals, watching her drift to sleep with a smile. When she passed, she did so peacefully, her hand in his, a soft smile still on her lips. In her will, she left him her home, not out of charity but choice, and a letter. My dearest Chinedu, you gave me 11 more years of laughter and light when I thought my world had gone dark. You were my second sunrise. If there's another life beyond this one, I hope we find each other again, even if I'm the younger one next time. Yours always, Margaret. Chinedu sat on the porch that evening, reading the letter under the same maple tree that had witnessed their first winter. Tears streamed down his face, but he smiled through them. Some months later, he published a memoir titled 2 Lifetimes of Love. It wasn't about fame or money, it was about truth. In it he wrote, "We were from different worlds, different times and different stories. But somehow our pages met. Love doesn't always arrive when the world expects it to. Sometimes it comes when you've stopped looking." When the book released, it became an international bestseller, not for its romance but for its courage. And sometimes when Toronto's winter snow began to fall, Chinedu would step outside, close his eyes, and swear he could feel Margaret's laughter in the cold air, like the whisper of a love too powerful to die.